This paper was fun. It really opened my eyes to how poorly known Spinosaurus is. And you have to take a back of a skull from Brazil, plugged in with the jaw from this part of Morocco, plugged in with Spinosaurus mirabilis is out. Let's deep dive into the cranial portion of the paper. This one's going to get technical. It's going to get pretty deep, and it should be very illuminating. Who am I? I'm Dr. Brian Curtice with Fossil Crates. I'm a sauropod specialist, works on tails, but I have no dog in this fight. I was very curious to dig into Spinosaurus. It's been a long time since I've thought about that animal. And, well, let's just share a bunch of findings. Let's start off with the latest and greatest, and that is this Spinosaurus mirabilis. Mirabilis meaning astonishing. And it was so named because of its crest. They were able to find, Paul Sereno et al., 2026 is the paper, and they found the specimen inland, which is important because up until now, all of the Spinosaurus specimens had arguably been along the shore and of a marine shore, and they were viewed by some to be an aquatic pursuit predator. Others have them being shore-living predators, almost akin to a heron. So you have to be careful because heron is a big giant thing. It's like saying mammal. There's tall herons and small herons, but they mean the big, tall, wading herons. So the paper itself drops, and the first thing you do after you look and see if they acknowledged you, no reason for me to need acknowledgments, they didn't cite any of my papers. That's just the way academics work. We go down this checklist of stuff. Then he started reading. And the holotype is actually from a place called Genus 1. And they found they've assigned 5 bones to the holotype. They assigned both sides of the maxillae, left and right, in fragments, as well as a premaxilla, a couple dentary chunks, and 5 teeth, as well as this thick crest, this nasal crest. Now, what was pretty cool was they had actually found it, I think back in 2019, and an image appeared of this specimen in 2020 where it was actually said that this is possibly a new species of Spinosaurus. They didn't name it then, and they only list these elements, which means they went back and either found more at the site or more likely opened up jackets and realized, oh, this bone is really this. But either way, they name it off of skull material, which is great because now we can compare that skull material to other specimens. And they did find other material. So in the Gengabi site, in Gengabi 4, they found a dentary. And this dentary is allegedly very complete, but I don't see any pictures or images of it in the paper. And on MorphoSource, I didn't see any either. And this dentary is important because this is the locality that also had a tibia. And they compare the tibia to the dentary, and they get a ratio, which then they claim suggests that the leg is more gracile than Spinosaurus aegyptiacus. The struggle I have with that is they don't tell me any of the measurements on the aegyptiacus either, nor what specimen they used. And I can't find any specimen that has a complete dentary and a tibia that goes with it. So I'm really confused, but I'm hoping that this is just the first of many papers that should come out on this particular specimen. Because it is a really cool dinosaur. I mean, who doesn't love Spinosaurus? It's really a classic, now iconic animal. Now, apologies, but I'm going to read you through the diagnosis of the genus Spinosaurus. So this is the characters that are required to be considered Spinosaurus. You need all of these characters. So I'm going to jump in and state that you need relatively small external nares and narial fossa. And what they're talking about here is their nostrils, their nose openings here. And they're retracted to a position closer to the orbit than to the anterior end of the snout. So they're in the middle of the spine. Here, let's hold up our Spinosaurus here. They're not at the tip where most theropods have their nasals, their nose, their nostrils. There we go. They're back much farther down the line on the particular skull, closer to the eyes and the tip of the snout. Pretty cool. And they describe the maximum diameter as less than half of the orbit. So the biggest this is the antorbital fenestra. These are the eyes. So this has to be small compared to the eyes. Pretty handy. It excludes the premaxilla from the border of the external nares. So the premaxilla is up here, And the nares is up here. Normally, the premaxilla goes into the snout on theropods, but in Spinosaurus, it doesn't. Again, pretty cool. Blade-shaped fused nasal crest lapped laterally along its base by a subtriangular prefrontal process. I'm going to show their image up here, and this is the image that appears in the paper. And you can see here they've got this little yellow area tabbed out, and that's part of this subtriangular prefrontal process. The punchline of that is the crest of Spinosaurus is made up of 2 bones, whereas the baryonychines, Suchomimus, baryonyx, and others, that is made up of a single bone. And that is something that they cite throughout their paper as a difference. But what I initially misunderstood was I thought that it was different between mirabilis and aegyptiacus, but it's not. They have the same construction there. That's why they're Spinosaurus together. Now they have a mushroom-shaped snout where the anterior end of the premaxillae is wider than long, with a constriction after PM3. So this mushroom-shaped snout is this bulbous end here, and the anterior end of the premaxillae is wider than long, and it constricts, that cool little snarl. I think we can find some images of that, which is neat. And then they talk about interdigitating mid and posterior maxillary and dentary teeth with festooned alveolar external margins. Well, what does this mean? It's a lot of syllables. It means that when these teeth go together, they interdigitate, they interlock, they bite down. And you see that in gharials and crocodilians today. And you see it in Spinosaurus, which is pretty cool. And then they talk about there, and that's in the, and where that is in the middle and posterior maxillary and dentary teeth. So back in here on the skull. And the festooned alveolar external margins, I'll see if I can get a picture of it, but it shows where the outside of the teeth are plugging into and what's going on with the bone texture there. Now they say there's a notch for dentary tooth 1 in the premaxilla at the height of the second alveoli. So we'll see if we can get in there and find a picture of that character of the notch for the dentary. So what they're talking about is up in here is a notch for the tooth down at the bottom. So dentary tooth 1 has a notch that it closes into. And then a diastema in the maxillary and dentary tooth rows with paired tooth pairs. So we'll go into how the diastema works here and how they all interdigitate and interlock. And there's a very key character that apparently only Spinosaurus has in the tooth rows. And then the final character they use is the anterior edge of the dentary protruding. That's down here with a chin-like process more anterior than dentary 1 tooth that is directed anterior posteriorly. So I have a question here though. They say this character is, and I'll read it, an unambiguous generic synapomorphy, which to me means every Spinosaurus species should have this character. But they go to great lengths to score mirabilis as not having this chin out in front, and Spinosaurus does. And you can see it on this chart here. I've grabbed a bunch of different Spinosaurus and thrown them on here and showed you how they're scored. Baryonyx and Suchomimus got a 0, whereas all these different Spinosaurus ostensibly get a 1. But it's an unambiguous generic synapomorphy. So it makes me wonder if that's the right terminology that should have been used. Either way, the specimen is pretty cool. The material they have supports these on the material that they did find. But there's a caveat there. They don't tell me how far apart the sites are. So Gengabe 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. I don't know if it's like right over there, 30 meters, 100 feet. If it's on the other side of a hill, am I talking 100 miles, 50 miles? I don't have any sense of how far apart these are. What I can tell you is they have another locality where they're finding the Spinosaurus mirabilis called Inguidi, and it is hundreds, like 400 miles or so away from the Gengabe site. Now, these are big animals. We know big animals cover long distances. It doesn't mean they can't be the same species. We call Allosaurus fragilis all over the Morrison Formation from the way north of Colorado, Wyoming, spilling up into northern Wyoming, all the way down to southern Utah. We call that all Allosaurus fragilis. We decide if it's Gemadsoni based on the age of the rocks. The holotype is MNBHJEN1. MNBH stands for Musée National Baobab Hama in Niamey, Niger. My apologies, I do not know how to pronounce those words. And what's key is these are an associated right premaxilla, portions of the left and right maxillae, the base and the bottom one half of the fused nasal prefrontal crest, including the flattened crest process of the prefrontals, the alveolar edge of the right dentary, and 5 maxillary teeth that were found near the maxillae. They were found in a small area near the right premaxilla. The right premaxilla apparently was preserved in situ, and it was collected in a field jacket. And so they published these in 2020, at least the maxilla, and they referenced additional material, and in this, and you can see on the screen here from that paper, and then you can see what they have today. Now they refer specimens to Spinosaurus mirabilis from localities Gen 2 through Gen 9, that's Gengabe, and Aguidi 11, 25, and 38 is what they write. And they do give us this diagram that shows all the bones that they found on it. They diagnose mirabilis, Spinosaurus mirabilis. I still haven't heard it said out loud. I should probably watch somebody's video. As a Spinosaurine with a low snout, parallel dorsal and ventral margins in profile. And that's what I think they're trying to show here. And then they have another character, one of 3, greater spacing of the posterior, maxillary, and presumably opposing dentary teeth. So their argument is, as you go back in the mouth of mirabilis, the teeth have greater spaces. And the last one is the most recognizable, which is the scimitar-shaped nasal prefrontal crest arching upward and backwards with a lateral eminence, something on the side, offset towards the anterior margin. And I've subsequently discovered there's a MorphoSource that has a number of these scans, and I'll be showing you some of these scans in these little movies, and we'll talk about the crests to see, because it's pretty cool that they did that. Not everyone takes the time to do that. Now they state the skull closely resembles, that's their words, Spinosaurus aegyptiacus. And they point out that the diastema in the upper tooth row of mirabilis is broad, with fossae accommodating 3 large dentary teeth, and the jaw margins are festooned, remember we heard that word earlier, to accommodate interdigitating crowns, as in Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, and they also note long-snouted crocodilians do this as well. So these are characters that are shared with Spinosaurus. The snout end, it has a slightly different shape in profile and side view. The premaxilla arching slightly above the rest of the snout, and the expanded dentary has a more subquadrate than oval shape. So they're citing that perhaps that's a difference of mirabilis from aegyptiacus, but there looks very similar. The posterior half of the snout, so the back half of the nose of Spinosaurus mirabilis, has a lower profile toward the orbit, with parallel rather than diverging dorsal and ventral margins. So let's see if we can see that character here in this figure. They give us figure 2A and 2C. So do we see, what are we looking for here? We're looking for a lower profile toward the eye with parallel rather than diverging dorsally and ventrally margins. You be the judge. Now, they say the tooth count of mirabilis is similar to that of aegyptiacus. They don't give us a tooth count for either of these individual animals. So it's always frustrating to me when you're telling me something is different, but you don't tell me quantitatively how. They state the spacing between the teeth and the posterior half of the snout is greater in mirabilis. They don't define by it how much greater they are, and in looking at the material that they display, everything is quite fragmentary. I'm taking the scan at face value, but when you look at their dentary of their Spinosaurus, I'm not sure where they drew that from. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that those are correct, but I really want to see these dentary. I want to see what's used for it. And I'm guessing, based on their description, that the denary characters are actually going to become from that denary over at Gen 4, because the denary found with the holotype was described as, where's it at here? The alveolar edge. So a tiny little bit of the right denary. Not enough to show the spacing of the teeth, I imagine, which means that they're pulling a denary from another locality of some unknown distance away and using those characters across the board. It's not wrong, but it certainly would be nice to have that better articulated, in my opinion, to let folks know. And the third character is this scimitar-shaped nasal prefrontal crest that arches up and back with this lateral eminence offset towards the anterior margin. That's all their words. The key thing with that, in my opinion, is sexual dimorphism. And we're going to go into sexual dimorphism and much deeper later on in this video. Like I said, it's going to be a long video. I'm not looking forward to editing it. But the time to talk about it right now is they argue it's not sexual dimorphism because they found only 3. And with only 3, they can't say one way or the other. So they punt. They're like, we don't know if it's sexual dimorphism. Because they found 3, and they look different than, and this is something else that kind of got to me. They claim to have 2 crests that show off quite nicely this Spinosaurus aegyptiacus flat low crest, but they don't figure them anywhere. And there's no photos of them. There's no scans that I could find. And so we're left to take them at their word versus the other 3, which do look similar to one another. But when I first read the paper, I thought they were constructed differently, but after rereading it, that's not the case at all. They're constructed quite similar to one another. Just one has a tall crest. And so are we talking about male or female? They argue that mirabilis lacks the raised vertical fluting present in the midsection of the nasal crest of aegyptiacus. So they're saying that this nasal crest in here has fluting that is not present on the mirabilis crests. And they have 3 of these mirabilis crests, which blew my mind. I mean, what are the odds? So that's cool. I don't know because they do not show us a Spinosaurus crest. They give us a figure of 2D, so let's take a look at that. But beyond that, I don't know. I'm working from a scan and not from photos, which I love all of the above, with videos as well. Now they talk about the fused nasals, so the nasal bones, that form the body of the crest. So the top of the skull, you got your nasal bones up in here. Remember, that's the nose orbit. The nasal bones are coming up in here. And this as it goes up, they're lapped laterally by this subtriangular process. We'll move to this figure here of the prefrontal. So this little yellow tab we talked about earlier. And the crest in Spinosaurus is a nasal prefrontal composite rather than fused nasals alone. And that lets you know when you have a baryonychine. Something I did not know was we don't have any Spinosauroids, heck, Spinosauroids, with an unfused crest. So this crest has to fuse very, very early in their life because we have some smaller size individuals and they're fused in every example that they talked about in the paper. Kind of interesting. Makes you wonder why. They talk about how when they looked at the crest that there's these paired vessels providing vascular supply to this dense bone up in this crest. If you got a crest, you got to get blood to it. And at mid-length, it ramifies, so it splits, and there's very few external canal openings. And they show this figure 2F here. And they say that because they're saying the keratinous sheath had to have had its own blood supply, like modern birds today. Now, they point out on the crests of mirabilis that there's these fine longitudinal, and in some areas even these crisscross striations and deep longitudinal grooves. Then they're present on the crest. And when you look at animals today, birds that have that, that's a suggestion that the keratinous sheath is present on the outside of this bone, which is where they get this really tall crest, is then they're guessing 25% or so higher is what the keratinous sheath would have been. And we don't know how high, but in some birds, that's a very reasonable thing to see. So maybe that happened here. For all the big giant skull that you saw people posing with, that is an extrapolated a full adult. They took the mirabilis skull that they found and they blew up the bones they do have to match that of the aegyptiacus and to show you the huge difference that the crest would make. Of course, they made an assumption of isometry, that it would just keep growing in proportion, whereas we know a lot of characters in the bones are allometry, which means they grow at differing speeds. And that's a problem that I had with the principal components analysis as well, because nowhere do they have a Spinosaurus that has all of the bones that they need to do their PCA in one specimen. So they made some assumptions, they scaled things up. Again, nothing wrong with what they did, but I wish it had been more clearly spelled out. They do say it, but I want people to jump up and down and tell me when you're doing something that might be controversial. I adored their asymmetrical image here on these crests, how it shows that none of them were straight bilaterally symmetrical. They're all bent. And I have yet to see a cassowary where it wasn't bent. I had some folks online who live with cassowaries in the wild saying, yeah, outside of one juvenile male they saw once that had a nice symmetrical casque. They're all bent. And all three of these were bent as well. And they note that Spinosaurus aegyptiacus also has this left to right side asymmetry. Pretty neat. Let me read you the direct sexual dimorphism quote. With only 3 examples from disparately aged individuals, it is not possible to assess crest dimorphism in Spinosaurus mirabilis. They then note that the holotype, which is the largest of the 3 Spinosaurus mirabilis specimens that they found, has by far the most robust crest, which again leads itself to thinking, well, maybe you've got sexual dimorphism within Spinosaurus mirabilis, or you at least have something tied to ontogeny, or as it grows older, these things strengthen up. I want to read you this quote because I found it fascinating. The crest in Spinosaurus mirabilis is relatively taller than in any other non-avian dinosaur, exceeding the height of the rest of the cranium at the orbits. If mirabilis grew to the size of aegyptiacus, then the bony crest scaled isometrically, there's that term again, would measure 40 centimeters in length, and with the keratinous sheath, 50 or more centimeters. That's where they get that big, tall, 20-inch blade coming out of it with the keratinous sheath. Now, I wondered to myself, it says any other non-avian dinosaur, but I did wonder the height of Corythosaurus and some of these other hadrosaurs with crests, Lambeosaurus and the like. They then go on to liken the fact that all the Spinosaurids have heightened dorsal vertebrae and with the big spines on the back, and caudal neural spines are very tall. And they're arguing the primary function was likely visual display. And they tie that to the mirabilis crest as part of the visual display. And they claim it's possibly a consequence of their habitual presence in narrow shoreline habitats with less obstructed sight lines. So their thought being that if you're wandering around and animals aren't, when it's easy to see you, well then having a crest is not a bad thing, because it's hard to hide, you're big. So you might as well go ahead and have a prominent big crest that let's look, I'm mirabilis, I'm the coolest one around. Look at my head horn and then my back sail and my tail sail. So their argument is that all of these 3 features, head, back, and tail, are for visual display rather than aquatic propulsion. So they are not a fan of the aquatic propulsion idea. Now, while we're on Spinosaurus, they do briefly talk about the origin of Spinosaurus, and this one threw me for a loop. Let me read you through it. The first 35 million year phase, comprising approximately half of the Spinosaurid fossil record, is currently known only from isolated teeth in Jurassic and lowermost Cretaceous horizons. So all we know is teeth. However, they say nevertheless, the array of shared piscivorous features of all later Spinosaurs arose during this phase, when Spinosaurs evidently remained relatively uncommon or in habitats less suitable to preservation. Now, if you're piscivorous, that means you're living by water, and animals that live by water are disproportionately preserved. If you look at all the hadrosaurs, the ceratopsians that were living along riverbanks, getting washed away in a flood, all of these dinosaurs in the Morrison Formation, these big sauropods that died in river bottoms, So it strikes me as odd that you would be a piscivorous creature and yet not be preserved in a disproportionate fashion. That one puzzled me. The features that they hypothesized were the elongate snout with some aerial retraction, so the nose is coming off the tip, a terminal rosette of premaxillary teeth, that big bulbous noseness, and a median nasal crest. So they're arguing those came about, but the only evidence we have is teeth. The cool thing about this, to put I'm always a glass is overflowing kind of guy, is they have given us a test of what a hypothetical ancestral Spinosauroid will look like. So let's hope we go find some. Let's go looking. Now, if you don't know your Spinosaurs, and I got to admit, I wasn't too clear on this until digging in, there's two main groups, the Baryonychines and the Spinosaurids. And the Baryonychines, they are Baryonyx and Suchomimus, plus a bunch of others that are scrappy, but those are the two poster children for them. They have the dentary teeth, they're tiny and they're numerous. I mean, look at the Suchomimus jaw. I mean, the teeth are just super, super silly. They look like gharial teeth, actually. And the way the maxillary teeth are as well, they're different than Spinosaurines proper. And these narrow jaws, they occlude within the very narrow snout. So this whole long, narrow snout here. And then they have, and they state this, the maxillae are joined in rugosuture for half their length. Interesting. Unlike the Spinosaurines. If you look at it from above, you've got a very different build of the lower jaw. Now you can always tell, if you're wondering, is that a Suchomimus or a Spinosaurus, just look and see, does it have a lot of little teeth with a narrow jaw, or does it have not nearly as many teeth and a jaw that opens up towards the back? Now, the locations where they found skull, Gen 1 found the holotype. That's what you see here on the screen. Gen 2 found a partial left maxilla, a nasal crest, and they say other cranial fragments, but they don't list what those are. At Gen 3, we have a nasal crest that's missing the tip. It was found in situ. And Gen 4 is where you have this partial right dentary. And Gen 5, they found a left maxilla, which they say is in situ. Gen 6, they found 3 isolated crowns in situ. I'm not sure how isolated crowns in situ are, but what can you do? And then on the other side of the country, if you will, at Aegypti, only site 38, where they found 50 isolated crowns, so isolated teeth. Here are the elements that comprise the holotype. And then they note how they swapped this crest for another crest. And they started filling in missing components from Gen 3, so another locality, as well as Gen 2. And I'm going to zoom in here, the V4047, the specimen that's hanging out in Milan. That specimen is the gray area on here. That's what they're using to fill it in from a morphological standpoint. Unfortunately, that's an aegyptiacus, so just point that out to you, or at least it's what it's been called. And then they finished the skull by, as you look in here on this one, they use irritator for pretty much all of the gray there in the back half of the skull. Now, the best I can tell is it's exactly what they use for their Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, because these two angles look the same, because we don't have any part of that skull preserved well. So if you think about what we're looking at here, mirabilis is just this holotype, and then these other elements are referred to it, and there's a lot of guesswork on this skull. The preserved portions of aegyptiacus are in blue, so they have restored this in silver. And they give you this dorsal view here to let you see that it's thinner, and that's why they're making it thinner. But there's a lot of negative evidence going on. I have not held these. I'm not a skull specialist, but there is a lot of negative evidence arguing against the excitement otherwise of them being two different species. Now, I've had a lot of fun with this paper. I went and grabbed images to look at the lower dentary scoring of if it's a 0 or a 1. I grabbed additional images to show scale differences. I really wish we could figure out some kind of geochemical assay on the bones themselves why not go use some of those techniques and then first demonstrate that all the bones in this part of the tail, which we know go together, let's go chemically assay them and make sure that they do go together. And then let's check the other bones, little tiny samples, and then let's go look at the front half and see if it's the same chemistry. And then, to ground truth it, let's go grab Allosaurus, some sauropods that we know are all articulated, and do the same process. So now we can start trying to find out if these bones go to the same area, because ostensibly the geochemical markers that transpired at times of fossilization should be readable by the right technology. It seems to me that would be a simple way to try and approach this problem, because all the other things that you've given me to try to lean in and accept, it doesn't work. They don't all work for me. I mean, on one hand, I get your logic and you might be right, but this is too important of a specimen. As an aside, this is the only cranial imagery that I was able to find, and thank you to the folks on Twitter who shared this image with me. I can't find any pictures of the dentary of the neotype. And why is there a neotype? Because in World War II, the holotype was blown up. But even within the holotype, we have a problem, because we have Spinosaurus, the classic Stromer holotype, and then you have Spinosaurus B, which Stromer himself admitted is from multiple specimens. And then you have the problem of the trouble with scribbles, why I don't trust illustrations and photos. I tried overlaying the diagram, the illustration from the scientific illustrator that drew the dentary with the photograph that Smith et al. 06 published. And as you can see, I can't line them up. So I don't trust characters scored from only imagery. And let's take a look at some of these 3D scans. MorphoSource has a lot of these elements, but you're going to find the elements, they're pretty beat up. Now, thankfully, they digitally assemble them for us, but let's take a moment to just take a moment to observe and enjoy. Now, what we'll do here is look through the MorphoSource images of the maxilla, or of the holotype in general. So let's look at this. This is a fragment of the maxilla, and you can tell it's a maxilla. Well, you can see the holes here, whether it's a maxilla or dentary. I'm going to take their word this is a maxilla, and they've labeled fragment A. And if you scroll down, you'll see that they used photogrammetry. That was what was used. It was a number of photographs were used and then stitched together in a computer. And you'll notice it's got color on it, which is often a hallmark of the photogrammetry that's used today. Here is B, and you see here again, spinning it around in circles. The actual material shows the holes that are inside where the teeth would have been. But it's a fragment. And then you've got fragment C, which has some of these nodules on it. And these drive me nuts when you find them in the field, because you got to prep those off, and they're looks like almost like ironstone. You can zoom in on these as well. You can make these full screen too if we were so inclined. We may do that yet. And the fragment D here, another fragment of the maxilla. So looking at these, other than seeing that, yeah, it's a chunk of something, I don't know. Fragment E. Every little bone fragment counts, and the reason I say that is, we'll come back to that. Oh, no, we won't. We're still dealing with the right side. So here's a maxilla with the premax, and the premax is this rounded area here that was in the front right side. So if I could orient it, you're looking directly at it nose to nose. This is its right side of the face, and as you see here, it's pretty eroded. Here's more right fragments of the maxilla. You can see the teeth, where the sockets would go. Kind of cool. And again, looking at these, you can see it's got some nice thickness, and the teeth slot right across there. We'll continue. That's all we have to work with. This is the holotype. This is what all future specimens will have to be compared to, these elements. And what I like is they separated out these elements. I mean, this is just like a husk of bone. And here you see more of the elements flying around. I mean, look at that. That's a giant concretion, or what is that? I don't know. It's a very baffling structure there. But what they've done, and I'm going to go full screen on this one, is they took all of those pieces and they assembled them. And so this is the right maxilla that you see in the paper itself. And looky, there's the inside, the medial side, that's the outside. So now the teeth would be here, here, here. And all of those tiny chunks that we just looked at get assembled to make this beautiful element. So the amount of effort and work and care that goes into this is absolutely amazing, which I love to see. And then we'll look at the other side because they did the left as well. We saw all of those left chunks. This is the outside of the jaw. Now you're looking at it from above. There's the teeth. You can see here. Pretty cool. And then we'll spin around to the side that faces the world. So left, inside the mouth, I should say. It's the left maxilla. Very neat to see how these pieces go together. And while we're looking, they also scan some teeth, which I found interesting. And to scroll down, these are directly from the CT scan. You see the modality, X-ray computed tomography. So they scanned the teeth to look through them. And they call these replacement teeth. They don't underscore why. It's a CT scan. I don't know why these are dubbed replacement teeth. If they were seen inside something else, it's not clear to me. And then here is a maxillary tooth, which has some little wrinkles on the enamel, and that's a tooth. And again, you can see it has been done with CT. There's no coloration on it. And speaking of CT, we looked at the CT scans earlier, but here is the CT scan of the nasal crest. So let's go ahead and go on a nasal crest adventure of the CT scan. And again, click the tools. You guys are wondering how to use this. And now you pick the slices. So I always go to one end and then we're flying all the way through. And that's the CT scan. Showed, if you didn't notice, it's very solid. And then here is, and scroll down, you can see this was lifted from the CT scan. This is, you get all kinds of CT data output. This is again part of the holotype, and this is the spine. And I think we can see, yeah, right here, those lateral ridges they were talking about. And then here is, and you can tell it's photogrammetry because it's got color. And this is the same nasal bone. The advantage of CT is either this one was done. Well, let's look at the dates. This is how you can see me research in action. This was loaded December 18th, 2023 was when the file was created. And this one was February 17th, 2025. So I suspect that this is how they found it. And there's a picture of it in the ground. And it's got all this chunky concretion off. And then 2 years later, they took it off, and now you've got this bone that you can see all kinds of nice elements on. And then lastly is the prefrontal, part of the bone that they figure in their paper, very important to the build of the nasals. And this is a CT scan of the prefrontal. And now we're moved over into the other sites, which, while we're here, this is the combo of the nasals, the lacrimals, and part of the right maxillary ramus are all on this. And if I'm driving you nuts, I apologize. None of my friends like to watch me play 3D shooters back in the day. But here's the crest. And this is the crest that they seem to have really gravitated towards. And it is the attachment right here. And you can see the paired nasals. These are the nasal bones. And really neat. I wish I was a better driver at these, so I could more easily orient you. But this is that crest. This is going skyward, and this is attaching to the base of the skull. Pretty cool to see. And while we're at it, they went ahead, and this is also from Gen 2, so we can go ahead and spin this one around. And they can show in the field how they found these pieces, and these pieces went together. So this broke in the field or was found disarticulated, and they noted on both sides that these go back together. I thought that was a neat little touch. So you can see how they approach the world. And then here is a nasal crest from Gen 3. And as I spin it around, you can see it has similarities, but this one seems far more gracile than the others we've looked at. And there's that thin lateral eminence. It's thinning out on the crest. Neat looking item. That's pretty cool. And because I'm a completist, here's that same Crest. It says it's Crest from Gen 3. And then we have a dentary fragment from Gen 4. Now what I can't figure out is this is a dentary fragment for sure, and that's cool. And this is the dentary symphysis of the right side, so where it's coming together. You can see teeth of the dentary, and then this is the front of the dentary, and this is that tooth that they use the character on because it's projecting forward. This is the chin facing downward, and you can see the steep angle and a tooth. But what I don't understand is where is the rest of the dentary? That can't be all they have. And then this one was done right before the paper came out. You can see it was created February 12th, uploaded the 13th. And this is their creation of the skull in its entirety, showing off its unique tall crest. And it's always fun to play with these. These are video games in and unto themselves. And we'll round out this cranial tour with the lower jaws. They've driven us, the dentaries here. Let's see what we have. Here we go. Spinning around as well. You can see the smooth back here suggests that's complete reconstruction. You can zoom in. They've added the teeth. But they note they have quite a bit of dentary, but I didn't see it in these. Maybe they haven't uploaded them yet. That's what I'm going to go with, because this dentary, how you would do a dentary to tibia ratio, you would have to first extrapolate the chunk you have to the length and then make an extrapolation. So I don't think they did that, but we'll find out. The power of CT allows us to fly through the maxillae. And these are the left and right maxillary items that were preserved on the holotype of S. mirabilis, and that is a CT scan. Pretty cool. Now, why are CT scans such a big deal? We're going to first fly through. This is the dentary from Gen 1. So this is a fragmentary dentary, and we have just gone through it in its entirety. What I mean by gone through it is this is a view from above. Literally, we're slicing this element, the entirety of its existence. And the CT scan is showing us those individual slices. So that's what it looks like from above. The whole bone would be laid right here. But the CT scan is just taking 1,000 little tiny images as it goes through. And then, if you look at it this way, you can go ahead and see whatever slice you want. If you want to see what's going on inside, you can look at some of the bone, find some vascularization, look for teeth. You can zoom in, you can rotate a slice, but at the end of the day, it's still a slice. And it reminds me of the video games I grew up playing in the 1980s. So that is why we love CT scans so much, is you can do an enormous number of things with them with just the simple slider bars. And then you can zoom in and zoom out. Well, not zoom in and out, slide through different parts of it so you can see inside the bone. And if you do this enough, these immediately begin telling information that to a lad like myself, I'm already on the phone saying, hey, CT buddies, can you help me out on this? It almost seems to me, and again, I'm an outsider in all this, I'm bringing fresh eyes though, that you've got two taxa coexisting with one another, or maybe one turns into the other. I don't know the stratigraphy of these areas, so I want to be careful what I say here. But I definitely get the feeling that there is a multiple coexisting Spinosaurids, if you will, bopping about. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'm way over my skis. But my gut tells me there's something up with these Spinosaurs. It's not just bad enough that we have, we've lost the original material. Let's not refer to it anymore. Let's not name new taxa from it. There's no way to know. That's what I call paleocryptozoology at that point. Yes, there is a picture, but if I can't lay one on top of the other, I got parallax, I've got all kinds of issues. Well, I'm going to have those issues no matter what I do to compare with. So that's a problem. Now, they have digital scans on the MorphoSource of a lot of this new stuff, which thank you. But even there, not all of it's up there, I'm guessing. And they have a lot of work ahead of them to unpack all these bones. So Mirabilis came out, but it's your standard nature / in this case, science. It's a big, giant, splashy paper. Let's get some cool things out there. And now we hope that lots of papers will follow. I know for certain, Evan Johnson Ransom advised me that he showed me, I cannot show you, but he has already done a tremendously cool new principal components analysis with a whole bunch more taxa. Spoiler alert, they're still going to stay in the Archosaurian realm. I didn't have my platypus or river otter in there. What can you do? But it's still cool to see that they've added so many more taxa. Because one of the other knocks was, well, you didn't use the right bird. You didn't use the right Archosaurs. Well, yeah, they're remedying that one. Fear not. And Daniel Vidal has advised that there's lots and lots of material coming. So I don't think we're going to have another Suchomimus, Nigersaurus, and, Paul, I like you, but that stuff from the 90s, Deltadromeus, I don't recall monographs coming out on these. So we're waiting 30 years in. I don't think this one will take that long. I think that this next generation of paleontologists that Paul has helped bring up will definitely be cranking out these papers. They're excited. Plus, the world's different. It's a publisher perish mentality in the grad students, postdocs, and undergrad days today. It's a lot different than when I was a grad student. If you got out 2 papers, you were a superstar. Now you seem to be needing 1 a quarter. Okay, off my moralizing rocking horse there. This paper was fun. It really opened my eyes to how poorly known Spinosaurus is. And you have to take a back of a skull from Brazil, plugged in with the jaw from this part of Morocco, plugged in with elements of Niger, and then move over here to Tunisia, and you've got Egypt, you've got all these places that you're just picking and choosing. And I liken it to if you tried to build a theropod from the Morrison Formation, and you had a little bit of Torvosaurus and a little bit of Martiosaurus and Stokesaurus and Goperion, and then you've got Hesperornithes, and said that one wrong. You've got Tanicolagrius, Solurus, Allosaurus. You mix all these in, you grab bones here and there. I suspect that as the splitters come out, we're going to see more and more splitting of Spinosaurus. That's just my prediction. Not for 2026. It's not on my 2026 predictions. That's a future one. But I think that pretty much everything in this part of the world is disarticulated, or you get lucky, you get a little pocket. Then the Neotype being an exception, clearly, and thank goodness that was found. And if the Neotype goes the front with the back, well, that's really cool. But if it doesn't, well, that causes more proportional issues. I still am perplexed as to what was used to make this dentary in this image and what measurements were provided to the dentary, to the tibia, what was the ratio, and what were the Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, dentary, and tibia, and ratio. Those aren't in the paper anywhere. I really wish I could see those Spinosaurus crowns, the crest, to know if we should be talking about sexual dimorphism more or less. And I'm so glad that people are out looking in some inhospitable terrain, some dangerous places in the world. These folks are bold and brave out there, and they're bringing back really cool specimens. I only got interested in this paper because they had mentioned they had a Rabachisaurus and a Titanosaurid, new to science. And I had read about them in 2020, and I was hoping to see more about them today. Still nothing. And I saw they have a Carcharodontosaur skull and postcrania, which apparently is really rare, and a lot of people were more excited about that than they were about Spinosaurus. I'm Dr. Brian Curtice with Fossil Crates, saying thank you kindly for the extended dive. I hope you liked it. Leave your questions and comments, and I'll make sure to answer. Adios.